Generally, we see the ban culture by the government or the executive branch of the government, but it is one of the rarest instances where we are seeing that Supreme Court banning the book, that is class and 8th NCERT book. So let's discuss the whole issue in detail. Welcome you all at the Ekagra Academy's channel, and let's come on this particular debate or controversy. Remember, we need to see this entire controversy from the UPSC and MPSC exams point of view, which kind of questions are expected in these exams. We need to focus on that aspect more. So let's see what exactly happened. So basically what NCERT did, NCERT, right, in their class 8th NCERT, right, they actually added a new section that is on the corruption in the judiciary, right. See, basically, if you talk about all the organs of government, legislature, executive, or the judiciary, they all have their own criticisms, but Supreme Court actually taken this word, right, in an offensive way, right? So let's try to understand what actually offended the Supreme Court, and secondly, how Supreme Court gets a power to take action against this particular aspect, right? So we need to understand two important things. Number one, that is suo motu powers, and number two, that is contempt jurisdiction, because this entire case was actually taken by Supreme Court on its own cognizance, right? Means no one has formally complained, but Supreme Court took this case by its own self. So try to understand its real meaning and the legal aspect, right? So if we see the suo motu power of Supreme Court. Now first we need to understand what we exactly mean by this term. This term is actually a Latin term, and its meaning is on its own motion, right? As we discussed, in this case there is a no formal complainant, right? This case taken by Supreme Court on its own self. Now how Supreme Court take these kind of decisions? See, whenever Supreme Court sees any kind of injustice happening, right, in the mainstream media, through the newspapers or through anywhere, right, they can take that matter by their own self without a formal complaint, and that is the meaning of on its own motion. That is a term called suo motu, right? Now how Supreme Court get this power? Supreme Court are getting actually these two powers as per these two articles, that is Article 32 and Article 142. So 32 talks about what? The Supreme Court's duty to protect fundamental right with the help of writs, right? And Article 142 talks about what? Complete justice. Now try to understand. As Article 32 is our fundamental right and Supreme Court is having a duty to protect our fundamental rights. Now it is possible that many times the people whose fundamental rights abridged by the government, they are not be able to reach, okay? They may be possibly belonging to the vulnerable section of the society, and they are not be able to reach to the Supreme Court. So in that case, Supreme Court uses this power, okay, and understand their responsibility. Apart from it, Article 142 gives power Supreme Court to ensure a complete justice in any matter. Means what? Even many times the aspects which are not related to any particular dispute or cases, Supreme Court deal with all those things, okay? So this also gives them power to have a suo motu in this specific matter. And as we discussed, that Supreme Court can take anything on its own with the help of media reports, public information, right? And we can see it is not a first instance. Supreme Court in past also, they took many cases in the suo motu way, like COVID-19 migrant crisis, like after announcement of lockdown, when laborers started walking towards their native places, okay, many of them died, right, because at that point of time entire transportation was stopped. So Supreme Court took this action just based on the media reports, not based on any formal complaint. And the same goes to the Delhi's air pollution case. And see, we can basically link both these cases with the Article 21, that is a right to dignified life, right? So This is the most important thing we need to understand about the suo motu power. Second part is the contempt of court. Now just try to understand what is contempt of court. Contempt of court simply means what? If you are not following the verdict or the orders of judiciary, you will be punished. And it is needed also. Why? Because let's say if Supreme Court gives a direction, gives a verdict, and if no one is following it on the ground, there will be no justice at all. So to ensure justice, to implement justice, our judiciary having this tool with them, and it is enjoyed by both Supreme Court and High Court, right? So if we see, Article 129 gives the power to Supreme Court, and Article 215 give a same contempt power to the High Court. Why? Because see, both the courts are having the status of court of record. Means what? Ki their verdicts, their decisions, right, will be having authority all over the country, right, will be having impact all over the country. So if anyone is not following the same, they can be punished, right? Now the question arises, what exactly contempt means here, right? See, even when we talk about a contempt, it can be in any form. Let's say Supreme Court has given an order to police to take action against certain like fringe elements, and police have not taken action. It may be considered as a contempt of court. Or if someone criticizes the behavior of judges, okay, of Supreme Court, remember, irrational criticisms, right? So those things can be treated as a contempt, and based on its nature, the entire contempt is divided into two parts. Number one is a civil contempt, number two is a criminal contempt. Remember, the main difference is in a civil contempt, okay, you are actually what? A passive. Passive means what? The court has given a verdict, a direction or order, and you are not following it, right? You are not violating it by doing completely opposite of it, but you are like inactive. So that is a passive in nature, and if you do that, then they have a power to have a civil contempt of court against you, right? Same if we talk about second one, criminal contempt. It is what? It is active in nature, right? When someone scandalizes the court, when someone sees the everything from the conspiracies, take a view, and criticizes the judiciary, right, or do something against the judiciary, it is counted in the criminal attempt. I mean, we have two examples for it, right? One is the Arundhati Roy case of 2002, where she criticized Supreme Court, and Supreme Court actually given her 1 day's imprisonment along with the file. And again, Prashant Bhushan, even a Supreme Court advocate, he himself has been punished for criticizing the judiciary and Chief Justice on social media. Because see, we need to see that a fine line, where the criticism is constructive, is rational, or just for getting publicity, right? So Supreme Court, based on it, uses this power of themselves. But again, the main question arises, who will define the boundary of rationality or irrationality? Why? Because this entire decision is actually violating fundamental rights of citizens also. Though we are upholding कि okay, courts have power to punish anyone for the contempt, but remember, as an Indian citizens, we have a right to freedom of speech, right? So if court do something wrong, and if someone criticizes it, the possibilities are there that Supreme Court or any other court may suppress it on the name of contempt, right? As well as, remember, in India, ultimately, as per preamble, who have the power? We the people, right? So they are supreme, right? Not the court is supreme, and court is actually accountable towards them. So if these people ask a question, right, and then court, you are using contempt power, is actually we are reversing this, right? So to ensure judicial accountability, we also need to make sure that court is using it rationally, but also need to make sure that institutional prestige should not be harmed, right? Okay, so class 8's textbook having that content regarding to corruption of judiciary, but it may also malign what the image of judiciary, that it is corrupt, right? So that is something need to be stopped, and we need to make a proper balance between contempt of power, between academic freedom, and between the freedom of speech. So that's all for this. Thank you.